Hello everyone and welcome back. You're here with me, Jen the Taxidermy Witch, and we are going to be reading Backwoods Witchcraft, Folk Magic and Conjure from Appalachia by Jake Richards. Now we've been reading this whole entire book, chapter by chapter, kind of in audiobook style, so that you guys can read the whole thing because it's a very popular book right now, and it's hard to get your hands on. So, however, just recently, it was last week I checked on it, and at Thrift Books I did find at least one copy. I don't know how many were there. I think more than one. And it was $15 and something. So people are reading them and then putting them up directly onto Thrift Books. That's something that they do there. So make sure to check that out. Otherwise, the cover price is $18.95. Not bad at all for the amazing amount of information that you get in each and every bit of this book. It's just amazing. So, chapter 4 is called Soups, Beans, and Cornbread, and it is on the topic of ancestor veneration. So let's go ahead and talk about this. It's not a terribly long chapter, so it'll go fairly quick. Let's have a drink of water, and here we go. Have mercy. Soup, beans, and cornbread are a time-worn dish that always satisfies when you're not sure you want anything else. It's a favorite of my family and many others going back generations. It is the poor man's dish for any time, breakfast, lunch, or supper. It's served often with stewed or fried potatoes and maybe some boiled cabbage. In old Appalachia, the dish was a staple because the beans and corn lasted well into the winter and helped folks get by during hard times. A majority of the culture in Appalachia involves food that's readily available: ham, bacon, corn, fried squash, pickled okra, cornbread, green beans, potatoes, deer meat, and more. Whether it's a family reunion, a funeral, a marriage, a grave decoration, or simply on a warm summer's night when all the family or neighbors would often get together and have dinner, food is at the center of Appalachia culture. Food is as important to our heritage as the stories passed down to us. Our food is the embodied struggle and poverty of our people, but it is also the love and pride we take in ourselves and in our upbringing. It is comfort for our grief and a sign of hospitality and camaraderie in our communities and in the seams of our family history. No buffering, right? Doing good, you guys? Welcome to all in the chat. So again, this if you just joined this chapter 4 is on ancestor veneration from Backwoods Witchcraft, okay? Often the food itself tells a tale. Every Thanksgiving, my pawpaw Trivet made chicken and dumplings. Every fall, my Ma Margie would make her famous pumpkin pie. My Mama Hobson was always making biscuits with apple butter, no matter the season or the weather. Years later, these recipes remain in cold tin and wooden boxes sat lovingly by the stove. The memory of the dead in Appalachia is somewhat based around the foods and drinks that they loved in their lifetime. Okay? Food and drinks that they loved in their lifetime. And honestly, if you don't know that yourself, you can just ask your loved ones that were close to them. You could maybe look in some old family diaries or journals. But try and find out the foods that they loved, because that is an amazing way to do that, to do leave offerings and such, things that they loved in life. One cannot think about their loved ones without also remembering what they enjoyed. So we recreate it in their honor, sometimes in an attempt to recreate those memories, although nothing could hold a candle to the foods they made in life. On the birthdays and other anniversaries of our dead, we often prepare their favorite dishes with a prayer that they accept what we've made of the recipes they left and that they're enjoying it in heaven. Many families continue a tradition of leaving a space at the table for their dead. You can see this in a lot of Hollywood photographs as well. Okay, food may or may not be placed on their plate depending on the family. So the first section is called the graveyard. Food is especially important in the little-known tradition of Decoration Day, which consists of the family getting together and eating before heading to the family cemeteries to dress, clean, and decorate the graves of their familiar dead. I have a great recipe from another book on a headstone cleaner that I make. I'll show that to you here. It's bay leaves, and it was just water, but now the frankincense has been in there so long, and the bay leaf, that it's yellow, you know, like alcohol. But it's not. It's just water, bay leaf, frankincense, and Celtic sea salt. And this is my headstone cleaner that I take out to my ancestors' graveyard, and I do the cleaning, and I have a video where I actually use this on my grandparents' headstone. So if you look at my graveyard or cemetery videos, you can see me using that out there and doing a whole entire, like an offering ritual. It's pretty cool. It was a good day. Alright. So yes, this day then is called the Decorating Day. Where did I leave off? Yes. So the food is especially important in the little-known tradition of Decoration Day. And that's the family getting together and eating before heading out to the family cemeteries to dress, clean, and decorate the graves of the familiar dead. The graves of the children are tended to first, and then those of the elders. Flowers, plates of food, toys for the children. That's a biggie for me. I always bring toys to children's graves. Liquor and cigarettes are often left on the graves. In Appalachia, this isn't seen as odd or in the least bit pagan. It is common sense and manners. That's awesome. It doesn't matter if somebody's dead or not. You never eat, drink, or smoke in front of someone without offering them some, especially if you know that they like it as well. After the graves of the family were honored, we move over to the graves with worn, indiscernible inscriptions and wash them, to pick up debris nearby and lay flowers down. We always take extra flowers for the forgotten dead. Bringing things to the forgotten dead is a really exceptional way if you do not have any ancestors. Like if you were adopted or something like that and you have no idea of your roots and you don't know how to obtain them, or you haven't obtained your roots yet and know where they lead, you can. I've read in, I think it was Hoodoo Sen Moise's book that I did an audiobook of the book on my channel for. Gives the suggestion that if you don't have anyone to go to but want to start doing spirit work, you can just start cleaning literally random graves that have been forgotten, are indiscernible, you know, or just absolutely filthy, and you know that nobody's probably going out there because they're so dirty. And it's kind of like adopting a child, you know, making offerings in the spirit realm. So I would just like to say that when he's talking about the forgotten dead. We also make sure to go around and read off the names and dates of everyone, of every stone, while offering a moment of prayer after each. It's not something that's taught, nor is there some ritualistic reason behind it. It's simply what the folks did. If ever someone comes by my future grave, long after I've been forgotten, I would like for them to wonder who I was, what I went through, and maybe what now indiscernible name was there. No one wants to be forgotten, especially the mountaineer, and God forbid, especially by his own people. Although it takes time and efforts to go to each gravesite, these visits to the dead are always looked forward to. The next little section here is called Death and Dying. Death and the dead have created a big impact in folk magic and beliefs of these hills, calling to the fact death takes our loved ones away, and the passing of those sometimes ended the survival of a family, especially if it was the breadwinner of the house. Behind the gravestones, hymns such as In the Sweet By and By, and upbeat religious ceremonies of Appalachian funerals filled with promises of going home to that golden country, there lives a thread of superstition and fear when it comes to visits from death and the bodies of those taken. The oldest traditions of washing and burying the dead are no longer, but it wasn't long ago that the dead were tied to the cooling board and swaddled in a shroud. This practice was as recent in my family as 3 generations ago. So I want to talk about that really quick. You know how in movies, you know how in films and cinema, of old times, you would see after someone died, they were in the house. They brought them into the living room, and they usually, from what it looks like, would prepare them themselves and get them ready. And I truly don't understand why we cannot have, like, if I passed away, why I couldn't be buried at my mom's house. Like, it really bothers me that I can't do that if I want to. Like, you have to take your family to a cemetery. Why is that? So if anybody knows any information on laws in the United States, particularly I'm in Washington State, the area of Seattle, right? Does anyone know any more to that than I do? Because from what I've heard, you don't have a choice. You have to either be cremated and your ashes spread somewhere, which is not what I want to do, or buried like in a cemetery or a graveyard, right? But I don't want to do that, So anyway, and I have other plans for my remains as well. Like, I'm into this is going to sound really weird, but I'm into taxidermy, and my tattoos weren't cheap, and I want my family to have them after I'm gone. So that's a whole nother story, and I'm sure that some people are going to go, oh! But it's been done before. Many people do it. However, I hadn't heard of that when I thought of it. All right, on to death and dying. I think that's where we're at. Nope, we're through that. Alright, so I was talking about the oldest traditions of washing and burying the dead are no longer. And so when they brought them into the house, they would wash them, they would, looks like prepare them themselves. And that's how I got onto that crazy tangent. But we all want different things for ourselves after we've gone, right? And a lot of us want to be remembered in different ways. And so just take that into mind, I guess, if you're still here and still listening to the lady that wants to be. Yeah. All right, so at the moment of death, the local church bell was rung for each year the person lived. Interesting for the Book of Shadows, you guys. Announcing their passing in the community. Everything stopped when the bell rang. So I guess at that point you could guess who it was. So if there was 37 chimes, you might go, oh shoot, that was Taxidermy. Maybe she fell off her daughter's horse. And I'm picturing myself in the time of Harlots, because Harlots season 3 just came out yesterday, so I'm all about that. Great, great, great period piece, in my opinion. Okay, so everything stopped when the bell rang. It would ring for however many numbers of years the person had lived. So there was a good idea that if there's only 100 people in the community, if the bell rang and it was like 90 rings, you'd probably know who it was. Anyway, I could see that as being a good kind of Morse code, if you will. Everything stopped when the bell rang. People bowed their heads and prayed, while others gave a moment of silence or ran crying to the home. The number of tolls helped folks figure out who had passed. Oh, okay. And the news spread fast. By evening, the house was filled with relatives and neighbors who'd come to offer food and help the family in their mourning. Now think of this, you guys. At that period of time, word would not have traveled the way it does now through social media, would it? People would have literally picked up their arm, rolled their hand into a fist, threw that fist at somebody's front door, and waited for somebody to come answer it and told them what was going on. And then that person might tell their neighbor. And, like, that's how gossip spread, besides, of course, the papers and such. But today, if you were trying to tell as many people as you could something quick, you would just use social media, wouldn't you? Then it wouldn't have been so simple. And it would have taken a lot more effort to get that word around. Okay, so yeah, we've got a lot left in here. Good. Care of the body was important, but the burden was sometimes spared from the immediate family. Other close family members or neighbors would take care of the arrangements, and sometimes the whole family sat up with the dead, talking about the person into the night with laughter and tears. Upon death, the body was washed and dressed quickly. There was no way to preserve the body long. Women washed women, and men washed men, for the simple taboo that you weren't to see the nakedness of someone who wasn't your spouse. Oftentimes the body was dressed in flowers, if they were available, to mask any smells that may arise from the deceased. After being dressed, the body was laid on the cooling board, which I wonder if it was marble, you know. Is everything okay in the chat, y'all? Oh, your kitty are laying and listening. Hey, Starlight. Nice to see you guys. Okay. Cooling table. Yes. After being dressed, the body was laid on the cooling board, which could be an old ironing board or a slab of wood that was usually passed down in the family. The chest and feet were tied to the board to prevent the body from rising, and a bowl of unmixed salt and earth was placed on the chest to prevent swelling and to keep the devil away. Sometimes these are all good things for Book of Shadows, sometimes a simple bag of salt was tied around the neck for the same purpose. Next, 2 pieces of silver monies, usually quarters or half dollars, were placed on the eyes to prevent them from opening. Pennies weren't used because copper tended to turn the skin green. And remember, so pennies that were pre-1982 will have copper. 1982 or before will have copper in America. And then pennies that are after that will not have copper. So just in case you were wondering. But it could have something that would make it purple. I don't know. Copper pennies. One of my favorite things. You don't get excited about pennies till you learn you can look at the year and figure out if you can use them in your witchcraft workings. Alright, so yeah, next 2 pieces of silver money, usually quarters or half dollars, are placed on the eyes to prevent them from opening. This is the origin of the phrase, he'd steal money from a dead man's eyes. The coins are also used for the age-old belief that you should enter heaven with your eyes closed. This shows the Lord that you see yourself unworthy to enter and that you beg forgiveness for your sins. Plus, I reckon Open eyes on a corpse is just plain creepy. That's probably true. The body was then buried within 3 days, but was never kept over a Sunday. So honestly, if the person died on Saturday, they were probably buried the next day on the Sunday, you know? Because it was never kept over a Sunday. Why is that? Why was it never kept over a Sunday? To do this meant that, great for Book of Shadows, to do this meant that another death would occur in the house that year. So if you kept a body on the cooling board over a Sunday, and remember, we can only keep them up to 3 days, another death would occur in the house that year. So if the person passed on a Friday, the body would be buried the next day. The body was also not to be taken out of the house head first, otherwise their spirit would either haunt the home or beckon another family member to the grave. Wow, see you guys, this is stuff to know. This is stuff to know. The body is always carried out feet first. Strangely, it is the opposite when the body is carried into the church. It must be carried in head first to keep the... So pallbearers, you know, like these are important notes to know. Strangely, it is the opposite when the body is carried into the church. It must be carried head first to keep the spirit from haunting the house of the Lord. The windows and doors were left open to let the spirit out, and oftentimes they remained that way until after the funeral. Another custom to keep the dead from returning was to change the doorknob and the deadbolt of the front door or rearrange the furniture. And that's kind of like walking out of the cemetery or graveyard backwards and in circles. It's just like it confuses spirits, apparently, you know. And that would be confusing, I would assume. After church, the body was carried by mule and wagon to the cemetery. It was never to pass over running water. And the wagon always stopped at any crossroads along the way to let the dead catch up. Wow. This is such good stuff. The dead were usually buried in hollowed out logs that had the top piece removed until burial. See? I would love to be like that, for that to be my coffin. This all sounds really like a beautiful tradition and process, in my opinion. Not being in a morgue, but being kept in your family home with your family and loved ones, you know? I don't know. I like these old-timey things better than new-timey things, usually. The dead were usually buried in a hollowed-out log that had the top piece removed until burial. These soon evolved into a simple pine wood box that were often made free of charge by neighbors or friends. Oh. The coffin was sometimes draped with a black cloth and lined with cotton or linen. And we see how extravagant that became. The digging of the grave was an important rite in itself, full of faith and superstition. The weather is often read while digging the grave. One old saying goes, "Blessed is the dead it rains onto." So if you're being buried and it rains, that's a very big blessing. Others say that when it rains, the soul of the dead is happy. The rain helps the family through grief, and it's a sign that the soul is going through heaven, since the vault has opened to let the rain down. That's kind of beautiful, because after Chloe has passed, we've had like 3 or 4 days of rain. So that's kind of beautiful. And I'll like to look at it that way, in my opinion. My cat Chloe, who just passed on. However, it was bad luck for it to rain into an empty grave. The treatment of the grave before it was occupied also held important power to foretell another death or bring misfortune. It hurts to cough. It was never left open overnight or on a Sunday, and the digging never started before sunrise of the day the corpse was to be buried. So you had to dig the hole on the same day, and you couldn't start before sunrise. Okay. Where are we at? There we are. Burials were often held in the evening as the sun was setting. If the diggers' shovels clink together while digging, there will be another death soon. So if two people were digging and their shovels clinked together while they were digging, that would be a sign of that there will be another death soon. And if the filled grave sinks after a period of days, a sink would be like after you put the dirt in and then there was a sinkhole. So if that happens, if the filled grave sinks after a period of days, it is making way for another member of the family. Signs like these were always heeded in the hills, and they've stuck for generations. If a bad storm happens soon after the burial, then it's a sign that the deceased isn't at peace. The first person to leave the cemetery after a burying foretells the next death. If a man leaves first, the next death will be a man, and vice versa if it's a woman. Direction plays an important part in a lot of our tales and tricks, especially with the dead. The dead were buried as Christ was, with their head to the west, so they would see Jesus coming from the east at Judgment Day. Also, many folks today still make their plot. Many folks today still make their plot is running east to west, and will do everything possible to avoid having to be buried in one that runs north to south. For that is the way witches were buried, and it is said that that's the path the devil ran in. After burying the body, young ones dress the grave with followers from the home. The tools that were used to dig the plot are left there for 3 days in the form of a cross to help ease the spirit of the deceased and sanctify the grave. Along with the cross tools, a lantern or candle was sometimes left on the freshly stirred soil to lead them on to glory. Lead them on to glory, as Nana said. Some folks would even take home a handful of the dirt. See, that's stuff I do. I have this, where Chloe passed away on the side of the road just 5 mornings ago. I'm not going to bring it up close and show you. I'm just going to show you from afar. You can see there's fur in there, and that was off of her. There's also a bunch of rocks that were splattered with her blood. And I took those, and I took some dirt from under where she was, where she passed away, and I lit a candle out there, and I've been lighting candles out there for her. And then I burned a candle on top of the jar, like one of these. And I let it burn down, and she's just been with me on my altar, and I've literally been like, the jar, the outside's completely sanitized and clean. I've literally been like petting this jar and thinking of her. It's been really, really, really hard. We had her for 6 years, and she has a brother that we have, and he's having a really hard time. So anyway, I understand and I get that, and I feel like it's a little bit intuitive and awesome that I was taking dirt from these rituals that we do ourselves, that we just think in the moment. I don't know a ritual for this, but there's a good chance it'll happen again. I have 4 cats, or I had 5, now I have 4. What'll I do each time one of them passes, or what'll I do? Well, this is what I've started doing. So for me, this is my personal ritual that I shared with you guys, and that was for an animal, of course, but I just wanted to share that and interject that. So let's find our place. Okay. So yeah, Some folks would even take home a handful of the dirt or a flower from the grave to let the dead know that they won't be forgotten. A lot of care was used in tending the dead, pre- and post-mortem. Throughout the whole process, they were loved and honored, lifted with the prayer and strength of their families up to the Lord. Today, Appalachia has conceded to handing the care of the body and funeral arrangements over to the corporations and authorities. There you go. However, in our case, it was very reluctant, like me, and didn't occur until the 20th century, as in the late 1950s in some areas, as late as the late 1950s in some areas. Funerals aren't as personal as they once were. Barely any time is given for the families at the burial, and the family is cut off completely from the care of the body between the bed and the grave. See, that's what I mean. I would rather have my family tending to me, not to mention all the disgusting stories you hear about what people do to people, but like, I would just want to be around my family and let them be with me and mourn me. Like, that's what I would want to do if my mom passed away. And I'm just, I don't know. It just seems more family-like to me to do it the old way than the new way. Some states have since made laws allowing the family to care for their dead, but they are in the minority so far. So we need to find out what states still allow the family to care for their dead. That's what we need someone to look up and let me know. For sure. Or I'll need to remember to look it up. Let me get my highlighter. Not that I'll move to that state, but who knows? Maybe it's my state. Alright, so the next section is called Communing with the Dead. And again, if you just recently joined, we are reading from Backwoods Witchcraft, Conjure and Folk Magic from Appalachia by Jake Richards. Jake Richards, anything you write will be on my bookshelf. This book is quickly climbing to the top of my shelf. And like almost every word in here belongs in a book of shadows, if you were going to be trying to practice some of these things. So Communing with the Dead is our next section. All year we pray and talk with our ancestors. Their plates are set at dinner, and we remember them in stories we hold near and dear in our hearts. Sometimes we see them around us, at home or in town. We've often seen my Papa Trivet walking up the hallway of the house. It's mostly just a glimpse of the flannel shirts he used to wear, but we know it's him, and by the smell of his Old Spice cologne. Okay, so I gotta interject some family stories. I'm not going to tell any personal stories, because I'll start bawling. But I will tell, and I've had many kind of smell instances with my grandma and my grandpa, and an uncle that I never ever knew. I've seen a couple of times, and he looks a lot like my father, which is interesting. But anyway, he may be a spirit guide. I don't really know. But it's the smell thing that happens most for me, because I feel like that's such a gentler way of your spirit guide saying hello, or your ancestors saying hello, than seeing them. Because remember, they don't want to frighten us. And for me, it's like, until you say out loud, I'm ready to see you guys, I'm ready not to be frightened, they're probably going to show up as little moths, or an animal acting funny, or, a special stone being right in front of you, or something like that. Wind chimes are a great way. But these smells and these pictures, one thing though, My husband's parents aren't necessarily into anything like this, but they completely respect it. And I found out on the trip, after talking with both of them, that one of their fathers passed away in their old house. Like, they took care of him when he was dying. And he passed away, and they would see him all the time, peripheral. You know, like, not look at it, say hello, and shake hands, but he was there all of the time. And they would just say, "Hi, Dad," or, like, if something happened, they would just say, "Hi, Dad." And these aren't particularly religious people. These aren't particularly, you know, but from their experience of doing home care for a loved one, that loved one passing away in the home, and then them living in the home for another, I think, like 10 years, they'll attest to it, like, absolutely, this person stuck around, you know. So I think that that's quite interesting, and I just wanted to say that. You get the smells too, Madam Butterfly? Yeah, definitely. The smells. And, you know, I can't say that if I was here alone and I just saw a ghost, like, in full form and figure, that I would completely, like, not be shocked and scared. You just can't prepare yourself for those things. And so I think that our guides do, and our ancestors do kind of take a calmer approach to it and try different methods. But that's my opinion. So on with the reading. 30 minutes, we're doing good. Okay, so other times my grandmother has said she saw her daddy in a dream, or her mama. I see my grandparents in dreams lots. Her daddy in a dream, or her mama moseying around in the kitchen. Sometimes these are the ghosts of the dead, meaning that they haven't moved on. Other times they're simply letting us know that they're still with us in spirit. That's sweet. The love and honor we give our ancestors is instilled in us at a young age. We never speak ill of the dead, or walk over a grave, or dismiss their presence in our lives. Some folks like to imagine them as guardian angels, and that's quite alright. Another word for guardian angel, spirit guide. And that's quite alright. Some families create shrines for their ancestors. Whether it's a place on the mantle, or an old vanity, or a bookshelf, folks often keep photos and keepsakes of the dead. These shrines are usually in the living room of the home and are always honored with a white cloth dollies or lace. I've never seen one in black. My grandmother has a spot in her living room for my Papa Trivet. His photos are hung on the wall, and some of his things are set on her vanity. His old handkerchiefs and prayer cloths, his obituary — this sounds like what I do for my grandma. His obituary and a printed poem from his funeral are tenderly set beside a painted porcelain cross with prayer beads on it. His wedding ring sits in a jewelry box. That's beautiful. My own shrine is a bookshelf in my living room set with mugs of water and whiskey alongside photos of my grandparents and great-grandparents and some of their belongings. I have my Papa John's whittling knife, my Mama Hopkins' old remedy book and Bible, and my Papa Trivet's Indian head penny, bolo tie, and cast iron work hammer. I also have a shard of old Cherokee pottery to represent my Cherokee grandmother, Siomi, I believe it's pronounced. That's beautiful. Their photos are lovingly decked with lace and rosemary, anointed with oil every week, and smudged with tobacco smoke. Many workers follow certain taboos and ancestor veneration, such as keeping photos of the living off the altar and only having photos of blood relatives there. The former is true in Appalachia as well, but the latter never took root, as many of us include friends and neighbors as family. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? That's what we do here. We're each other's family. Even if we have blood family, and for those of us who don't, this is a very important family. TTW. Where did I leave off? Yes, okay. So I consider him my family, and my children as well, regardless of blood connection. Another taboo for some follow is never put salt on an altar, as the ancestors apparently hate it. Not here. We put salt on every food we eat, so every dish we offer, and I've read that in a lot of books, don't salt the food. Those were hoodoo books, it's just so that you know. Hoodoo, conjure, yeah, but folk magic was in there too. I don't know, so even different parts of folk magic put salt or don't. But in Appalachian conjure and folk magic, they do put salt. Because every dish they had salt in it. They never complained with us. In order to do this work, you will need to build a relationship with your ancestors. Ask your living ancestors about them. Learn their stories, their achievements, and their setbacks. This is especially helpful if you didn't know them in life, as you will be able to relate to them through the stories. Yes, so this is especially if you didn't know them in life, it's especially helpful, and we'll be able to relate to them through their stories. Set up an altar to them. This all not only makes a place for them in your home, but in your life as well. You will be aware of them and their presence every time you pass it. Set out a white cloth or lace, and over and over at the altar it says over and over, white candles, white cloth for ancestors, in both types of books I read. So white cloth or lace, and place their photo on that. Set a dish aside for their food, and keep those same dishes every time. I keep a candy dish on my shelf for the chocolates and cinnamon candies my grandparents loved. Oh. Place a couple glasses of water, a candle, and other things they enjoyed in life. Maybe that's a tin of snuff or a pack of cigarettes, a shot of their preferred liquor, old dolls, or other items that once belonged to them. Arrange these according to your own feelings, praying from your heart as you do. Most workers dedicate a certain day of the week to honor their ancestors and refresh their water and offerings. I choose Sunday as it's traditional, the day of prayer and rest in the South, but choose whatever day you feel is the best, or whatever suits you. On that day you offer your ancestors prayer and love, but it is also time for you just to talk with them. Remember out loud fond memories from your childhood with them. Tell them how much they are missed and loved. Mourn their loss if you're still at that stage. Tell them how your day went, what troubles you, and what is uplifting you. Don't feel that you're talking too much or bothering them, because you're not. It's like a phone call from a relative you haven't heard from in ages. Don't worry if you don't always feel their presence. And I'm going to show you guys something that I do that's really odd, but I'm going to show it to you because it's something I add into when I communicate with my grandparents. It's not that. So I've got this old telephone. It's an old, like, brass telephone. And, when I talk to my grandparents, because I keep their altar stuff down on the floor, so I'll literally, like, bring their picture up and sit with it, and, just, like, you know, talk into here and have this with my ear and just talk to my grandparents. Because for whatever reason, when I use this phone, it like, it it paints some sort of visual picture for me, and I'm able to visualize it more, I'm able to focus more, I'm able to feel like there's communication here. Also, this is like an old antique telephone that I just adore, and I love having around, and it's from their same era that they were alive. Like, I'm doing whatever I can personally just to get this, like, feeling of communication. In a way, it's my own ritual, right, that I do to connect with them. I don't do it every Sunday. I should absolutely do it more. So, in that note, I'm going to keep it out, so that I do this more often. But whatever helps you kind of connect in that way, just do it. And maybe you could, cleanse it with a little Palo Santo in between. Just whatever you make your little ritual to be, practice that. And the biggest thing is speak out loud. Speak out loud, because I do believe that is how we're heard. I think that we can be heard in silent prayer by our ancestors and our spirit guides, but I think when we literally say things out loud to them, especially gratitudes, that's a really special thing. All right, back to the book. Back to the book. So I think I was talking about how it's like a weekly phone call. Right. Don't feel that you're talking too much or bothering them, because you're not. It's like a phone call from a relative you haven't heard from in ages. Don't worry if you don't always feel their presence. Sometimes they won't be around, but it's not because they don't love you. It's not a telephone service, and they don't always answer. God just didn't intend for that. My ancestors only show up and speak to me directly when it's important. Other times, I simply keep my faith and love them for wrapping close together. Mama taught me the beloved dead might not always speak to you when you want, because if they did, it would blur the line between the living and the dead. They died for a reason greater than you or them. Also, it just isn't good for the mind. Another possibility, if you believe in reincarnation, as I do, is that some of your folks may already be in another life. However, the vast majority of Appalachian doctors and grannies were Christians, so they believed the dead were either already up on high or sleeping in the grave awaiting Judgment Day. It sounds zombie-like. The belief varies based on the church and region. So if Mama doesn't show up or make her presence known, it's probably for good reason, whether that's incarnation in another life, sleeping in the grave, or simply staying quiet for the time being. Or maybe you should just pay closer attention. Yeah, listening goes deeper than the ears, it goes into, intuition, really hearing and listening intuitively. And that takes a lot of practice, right? Keep practicing. You'll get there. I mentioned earlier the practice of washing away the sins of the blood in regards to our ancestors' acts of slavery, war, rape, etc. That was in another chapter. Among the sins are the traumas they went through that have spiraled down in the family, such as alcoholism, suicide, divorce, abuse, and gambling addiction. We have a duty to them because it is in their stories that ours begin. Their stories may have begun in suffering, poverty, and sin, but through us they can end with healing, stability, and salvation. That's really beautiful. We can break the blood-borne chains that keep them down and that have the power to take us down as well, unless we act. There's a very strong belief in general chains and curses in Appalachia, but the majority have nothing to do with witchcraft, but rather with the mind and spirit. Many of us have battled depression and suicidal thoughts. A handful of my ancestors have committed suicide. In my own life, I broke that chain early in my commitment to live. I stopped self-harming. I stopped dwelling on the part of my family history and I started enjoying life. Figure it out in your own blood. What secrets, troubles, or sins lurk within your family tree? Talk to your elders. Back in the day, some things weren't spoken of. Families would literally cut themselves off from a relative because of something they wouldn't speak of for years. Sometimes that silence between folks lasted to the grave, and I'm sure it still happens all too often. And that's really sad. And I think when silence happens to the grave, like, it traumatizes probably the living and the dead, you know? It's not often that the dead can communicate with the living without the living trying, in my opinion. You know, like, if you just don't believe, it's going to be really hard for a spirit, I would guess, to make all the effort to get your attention, you know? These are just my thoughts, and I'm just sharing them. Thanks for being here, y'all. Having a good day. Thank you for being a part of it. Folks have offered differing meditations for this kind of work, but I couldn't find good soil in them. If you think you can, then I suggest you look into it further. As this writing is of my own family practices and experiences, I can only offer this. Pay attention to the family stories, to your dreams, and to your own behavior. The bad root under it all will show itself in time. Maybe there are hints lingering in your childhood memories. Maybe it is something you'd rather not speak about. I would suggest some shadow work. Take it to the ancestors. They already know, and they're willing to help. There you go. Maybe I should try that instead of shadow work. Oftentimes, these sins that live on are the things holding them here and keeping them in place. Our ancestors protect us and comfort us from the other side. They can be a part of your life to both celebrate with and cry with. Listen to them and your whole heart. I never feel alone because I know that my ancestors and my spirit guides are with me whenever I need them there. I never feel alone. I used to feel alone, but I don't anymore. During your daily life, pray to them. There's not a day that goes by that I do not love and honor the makers of the footprints of my path. They have made the way with their sweat and tears, which has made our lives considerably easier. We owe them our memory and love and respect. In return, they are our biggest comfort and our strongest shield. I've heard of folks who have bad dealings with some of their dead, and it's almost always due to that bad root in the blood. Know this, you don't have to call upon a person you had a continuous relationship with if you're not ready. In your prayers, tell your ancestors that you do not wish for Jane Doe to be present because of certain reasons. In your prayers? If it was me, I'd say it out loud, but it says here, in your prayers, tell your ancestors you do not wish for Jane Doe to be present, or Uncle Larry, or whoever. I don't have an Uncle Larry, but anyway. Because of certain reasons, the spirits will understand this and will not push you further unless consolation is needed. Often these are the dead that will come to you in dreams, smells, memories, and more. This is them wishing to connect with you, to often make amends, and more. You are not obligated to concede, but you do not need to acknowledge them. But you do need to acknowledge them and forgive. The primary thing that holds the dead back is unfinished business, cliche as it may sound. Well, remember, there's a lot of truth, in Hollywood, and if that's what they're showing in Hollywood movies, it's that whole eyes wide shut type thing, like, we told ya. Anyway. This needs to be mentioned. Being dead doesn't make a person a saint, suddenly enlightened, or better than they were. The dead come back to us as they were in life, and they will exemplify this when you work with them. If they were mean and hateful in life, they'll be the same in death. If they were kind and gentle, they'll be the same. Bad branches of the family tree can still have a negative effect on you and the fruit you try to grow. It is important to know the spirits you're calling up, even among your ancestors. When tending to their altar or going to them for something, I always knock on the table 3 times, manners, and ask them to show in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. By that name, no evil or darkness may approach. You may also want to clean the altar once in a while to wash with a wash of vinegar, whiskey, and church dust. Now, this would not be church dirt, but it would be like if you were to sweep a church and the dust that was on the floor, that would be church dust. Not like I dust a shelf and here's church dust. Dust from the floors is, I believe, what they're talking about here. So you would make a wash with vinegar, whiskey, and church dust. This is the root of your family tree, and your shrine is the garden where it's planted. Nourish that tree, but at the same time focus on finding the bad root that has plagued it. Your life will be better for acknowledging it and for doing the work to heal it. And your ancestors will be at peace knowing that their blood and sins are on the mend, and they can rest. That's it! And the next chapter we'll be reading from is chapter 5, which is called From the East, from the West, Living by Signs and Omens. So that will be quite a good chapter, Living by Signs and Omens. We'll just flip through and see what it's going to talk about. Some gardening stuff, some astrological stuff. To sow is to reap. Root and weather signs. Your garden. So signs in the garden. Yeah. Cool. So next will be chapter 5. Guys, thanks for joining me, Jen the Taxidermy Witch. I don't monetize my videos, and I don't plan to. I did add my Patreon and my Etsy. If you want to check those out, they're in the description. Because I will continue to do these audio type books, and any donations that are made to the channel are much appreciated. And I just saw that since I did the last video and this video, that there was another monthly dollar donation made to the channel. Remember, you guys can donate as little as $1 a month, and that adds up to $12 a year, which is quite a lot of candles for the Taxidermy Witches channel. So all my love to you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you back later today after I catch my breath and drink some water. I want to reveal this book to you guys, the Salvador Dali cookbook, the Surrealist Cult Cookbook. Amazing. There's so much art that was made just for this book, and I'm going to reveal to you every page. So we'll look forward to that. I love you guys all so much, and we'll see you soon. Come back for chapter 5 in a couple of days. Maybe tomorrow. Bye, guys.